The story begins in 750 BC when the Near East was divided into many small kingdoms and city-states. They were wedged between the Assyrian Empire to the north and Egypt in the south. Among them was the Kingdom of Israel, whose people worshipped several gods, including Yahweh. In the 7th century, following the birth of Islam, begins an Arab conquest. In some cases, Jews support the conquest in the hope of better conditions. They are tolerated by the Arabs and only polytheistic peoples are forcibly converted. In Jerusalem, the Dome of the Rock is built, making the city holy to the three monotheistic religions. It is in this context that the first Zionist Congress is held in Basel in 1897, contemplating the founding of a new homeland for the Jewish people in Palestine. But the Ottoman Empire is fiercely opposed to the project. At the end of the war, the map of the Middle East was redrawn and divided up between the European powers. Palestine comes under the British mandate, marking the beginning of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
There is no such thing as the Palestinian people. It's not as if we came and threw them out and took their country. They didn't exist. In 1937, Arab leader Ani Abdul Hadi made this statement to the British Peel Commission: "There is no such country as Palestine. Palestine is a term the Zionists invented. There is no Palestine in the Bible. Palestine is alien to us." In his testimony to the Anglo-American Committee, there is no such thing as Palestine in history. Absolutely not. In 1956, a Saudi representative to the UN stated, "It is common knowledge that Palestine is nothing but southern Syria." And more recently, Syrian dictator Hafez al-Assad gave this lecture to PLO leader Yasser Arafat. Never forget this one point: there is no such thing as a Palestinian people. There is no Palestinian entity. Palestine is an integral part of Syria. Many Palestinian Arabs, including Arafat, have claimed to be descendants of the ancient Canaanites. A convenient argument, since the Canaanites were the first known inhabitants of the land of Israel. Even as recently as May of 2014, a PA spokesman stated that the Palestinians have been in the land for 5,000 years. But history shows that there's no way the Palestinians could be related to the Canaanites, because the Canaanites were almost completely obliterated by the Israelites in the 13th century BC. The few that remained were assimilated into Israelite culture. The Philistines were a seafaring people who came from Crete, the largest of the Greek islands.
The Philistines got their name from the Hebrew word plishtim, which actually means invaders. Palestine means invaded land. Why should we call it that?
When the Philistines invaded Israel in the 12th century BC, they stayed close to the Mediterranean coast. They never settled in Jerusalem, Hebron, or Jericho, all cities claimed today by the Palestinians. But if the Palestinians want to claim them, they would have to acknowledge that their real ancestral homeland is not Israel, but the Greek island of Crete. Who are the Palestinians? Biologically, they share DNA with Saudis, Iraqis, Syrians, and Jordanians. Simply put, they're Arabs. The Temple Mount is the holiest site in Judaism and the third holiest in Islam. Muslim tradition says that Muhammad traveled here to the Al-Aqsa Mosque on his famous night journey, and that tradition forms the basis for the Palestinians' claim to Jerusalem. Several Muslim scholars place the construction of the mosque around 690, while Muhammad died in 632. So how could Muhammad's famous night journey have taken him to a mosque in Jerusalem that wouldn't be built until after his death? In 1927, a strong earthquake damaged the mosque, and during renovations, archaeologists analyzed the structure. They found beams made from cedar of Lebanon and Cyprus, dating as far back as the 9th century BC, around the time of King Solomon, who had used those very materials to build the first Jewish temple. As Golda Meir once said, "How can we return the occupied territories? There is no one to return them to."
The term occupation is when you possess something which is not yours or which is someone else's. This is not the case of the West Bank. When you talk about occupation, yes, there were many occupations over the West Bank, starting with the Babylonians and Assyrians and Greeks and Romans, all the way to the Ottomans and to the Brits. To call the Jews occupiers in their own home, this is really a unique travesty of history. The West Bank was never held by the Palestinians. They were never sovereigns. In fact, there was no other sovereign over the West Bank than the Jewish people.
Mired for more than 2 centuries in backwardness and grinding poverty, Palestinians were never recognized by the Ottoman Empire as possessing any distinctive national identity. The Palestinians quickly took advantage of their new freedom to speak bluntly, demanding a stop to the Jewish immigration which had just begun. Said one Arab representative during the Paris Peace Conference, "We will push the Zionists into the sea, or they will send us back into the desert." Aref Pasha Dajani, a Palestinian leader from Jerusalem, warned that it is impossible to live with the Jews. The Peel Commission's final report, published in July 1937, proposed such a division. The Jews were offered an independent state in a small enclave along the seacoast from Tel Aviv to the north of the country, constituting about 20% of the remaining Mandate territory, while the Palestinian Arabs would get 80% for their own state. Desperate for any means to be able to bring in large numbers of the endangered European Jews, the Zionists reluctantly accepted the Commission's partition plan. Led by the Mufti, the Arabs rejected partition out of hand. Shortly after the UN vote, the 20-member Arab League sent their newly organized Arab Liberation Army against the Jews of Palestine. Elements of 5 regular Arab armies from Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon invaded Israel on May 15, 1948. Arab League Secretary General Abdul Rahman Azam vowed, "This will be a war of extermination and a momentous massacre, which will be spoken of like the Mongol massacres and the Crusades." Their leaders rejected a partition plan that would have given them independence and more land designated for their state than for the Jewish state. Instead, they ended up with nothing, and 650,000 Palestinians became refugees. Jordan's King Abdullah sent his Arab Legion to occupy the Palestinian West Bank and annex the territory to his kingdom. Egypt took the Gaza Strip and for the next 18 years denied Palestinians any civil rights. It never occurred to the rulers of Jordan or Egypt to create a state for the homeless Palestinians, nor did new Palestinian leaders like Yasser Arafat protest this occupation of their land by foreign rulers. For his part, Palestinian Liberation Organization Chairman Yasser Arafat walked out of negotiations, went back home, and launched the Second Intifada. Invoking Islamic Jew hatred as justification, the Palestinians conducted a 3-year brutal campaign of suicide bombings against Israeli pizza parlors, wedding halls, and discotheques. Olmert also offered to divide Jerusalem, enabling the Palestinians to locate their capital in the eastern half of the city. Promising to come back the next day for further discussions, Abbas took Olmert's map to his Ramallah office, just a few miles outside Jerusalem, for his aides to study. But Abbas never returned with the map. This was the last time the Israeli and Palestinian leaders met. Many times over the last 63 years, both the international community and the State of Israel have offered the Arabs of Palestine their own state. Each time, these offers have been met by more violence against Jewish citizens.
So Israel can't go back to the so-called 67 borders for 3 reasons. 1, before 1967, the West Bank was controlled by Jordan, not by the Palestinians. And Jordan's annexation of it violated international law. 2, The land was legally promised to the Jews by the British Mandate of 1922. And 3, there was no Palestinian state in 1967, or ever. As Golda Meir once said, how can we return the occupied territories? There is no one to return them to.
Hold on. So who can stay once they take Palestine? No Jews?
Not one Jew.
Not one Jew, even the ones who were here before 1948? What?
Yeah, even before.
Okay.
الدولتين. What do you think of the two-state solution?
حل الدولتين، دولة فلسطينية ودولة إسرائيلية. أنا كفلسطيني مرفوض جدا.
As a Palestinian, I refuse this.
Okay.
لأن الأرض أرضي وأرض أجدادنا، كيف بدي أعطيهم أنا جزء منها؟
Because it's my land and it's my ancestors' land. How can I give it to someone else?
Okay. So if he takes back Palestine of 1948, what happens to the Israelis?
Okay, إذا بتسترد أراضي 48 شو بيصير في الإسرائيلية؟
يرحل.
They can leave.
Where are they going to go?
وين ممكن يروحوا؟
من محل ما شو.
Where they came from.
What about people who are mixed and they're from all different places?
طب بالأشخاص المخلطين اللي هم من عدة أمكنة زي مثلا أبو فرنسي إنه بولندية.
اللي أوجد المشكلة هو تحمل مسؤوليته، بس أنا مش أنا المواطن الأصلي مش.
Whoever found it, the problem should find the solution. It's not my responsibility. Palestine, it's my land. أول سؤال أو إحنا حسب بس سؤال واحد، إذا الفلسطينيين استردوا كل فلسطين، شو رح يصير في 6 مليون إسرائيلي أو يهودي؟
بيرجعوا لمكان ما أجوا منه.
علي صوتك شوي.
يعني بيرجعوا للمطرح اللي أجوا منه.
They will go back to where they came from.
What about for one who's a quarter Polish, half Yemenite, and a quarter Iraqi?
طيب والمخلطين مثلا اللي أصله بولندي ويمني وعراقي مع بعض وين يروح؟
No, it is all mixed.
Yeah. What if he's mixed Polish, Iraqi and Yemeni?
من مطرح يعني مسقط راسه منين اجى علينا، هو بالنهايه هون مش ارضه، هو كان
انا عارف
بالضبط، هو راح يكون يرجع من المطرح اللي اجى فيه، كان من العراق او من اليمن او بالنهايه هناك لسه موجودين، يعني رايحين نرجع للمطرح اللي اجى منه.
He has to go from wherever he came from originally, whether it was Iraq, Yemen or
He has to go back.
other place. Yes.
What if his family was here before 1948?
طب إذا عيلته كانت موجودة هون قبل 48
بالنهايه هو له حق المواطن يكون موجود في الدولة الفلسطينية مش في الدولة الإسرائيلية.
Well, in that term, then he would have the right to be a citizen in the Palestinian country, not the Israeli country.
When Palestinians get back Palestine of 1948, which is today Israel, what happens to the Israelis?
Okay, السؤال هو when or if?
Either one, it's fine.
إذا أو لما الفلسطينيين بيسترجعوا فلسطين 48 شو بيصير في الإسرائيلية؟
الإسرائيلية أكيد رح يتدمروا لأنه فلسطين مش من حقهم.
For sure the Israelis will be destroyed because Palestine is not their right.
Destroyed as in killed?
بتدمروا يعني
يقتلوا؟
أكيد.
لازم يقتلوا.
They should be killed, yes.
لا يستردوا بالقوة.
Because what was taken by force can only be retrieved by force.
Taken back by force.
قوة طاغية يعني. إسرائيل قوة طاغية. يعني أكيد ربنا في يوم رح
Because Israel is a very powerful tyrant, and I'm sure that God will. أكيد ربنا
يدمرهم.
For sure, God will destroy them.
Am I the reason you get stoned every week now? Build up integrity, got you texting, emailing me, wanting me to feel with you. Baby, just face reality, move on.
Sometimes it's hard to face reality.